waiting on?
We are waiting on Frank.
Frank, got it.
Yes,
And
he is joining.
Peter Barth is joining as well, is he not?
I believe so. I haven't heard otherwise.
I did send him an invite for this, so he should be attending. I can follow up with him as well.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. Hello, Craig. Got all gussied up with a tie and a button-down shirt. Wow.
Always respect for first time owner.
So true, so true. Glad to have Julie and Lisa with us for our closed session. All right, there is Peter. Let's give Frank, Judy, maybe one minute. It will be good to have him back and engaged. And appreciative of everyone's time on a Friday. We've got one open session item of note before going into closed session. So Linda, why don't we go, or Judy, why don't we go ahead and let me suggest we go ahead and get started, and hopefully Frank will join us shortly.
Okay, I'll call us to order. And we're obviously being recorded. Linda, do we have any public speaking?
We do not, confirming that we don't have any public comments on item 2.
Okay, is there anything on our agenda that we have to do in the open session?
We do have item 3, which is the review of meeting minutes from the executive committee on August 26th. If there aren't any additions or changes or deletions from the executive committee, we can note for the record that these are received and filed.
Does anybody have any changes they want to make?
Not I.
No.
Okay, so receive and file, please.
Thank you.
And then we have agenda item 4, Judy, which is an open session that Peter Barth and Sarita are going to be speaking to, which is a short item related to updating our bylaws and governance guidelines.
Okay.
So Peter, you're going to tee that up for the committee?
I will tee it up.
Thank you.
And hopefully this won't be too long. We can get you all to the meat of the closed session. But good morning, everyone. I will hand it over to our fabulous counsel, Sarita, in just a moment. But as a reminder, last fall, as we were closing the year, we highlighted, Linda and Kim and Sarita and I highlighted that as we were doing our work through the year, we would likely come across some opportunities to update our bylaws and our governance guidelines. And we wanted to make sure that the executive committee was aware that that might happen. And then back in March and back in May, in our executive committee meetings, we reminded folks that we were paying attention to that, and that in the fall, we would come first to all of you with some proposed changes to our bylaws and governance guidelines, and then eventually to the full board with the intention of taking action in November. The changes you have in front of you reflect some limited opportunities to clean up our bylaws and our governance guidelines. We are not proposing any sweeping policy changes. This is not about fundamentally changing the intent of our work. It's really about making sure they're accurate and that they allow us to do our work in ways that reflect other changes that the board has approved. For example, the emergency provisions and executive succession plan. How can we have the most flexibility to make sure that we can do our work as a board as we move forward? Just as a quick example, Sarita will walk through all of them, but as a quick example, our current bylaws refer to the 2015-2020 strategic plan. That is clearly out of date. And so not only are we proposing updates, we're proposing that we don't refer to a specific strategic plan, that we just refer to the current strategic plan, because we don't want to have to keep having the board update bylaws and governance guidelines every time that there's a change. So that's the nature and spirit of the changes you have in front of us. We welcome your feedback after today's meeting. The goal is that we will incorporate any feedback that we receive, that we will present these to the full board in October as information, and then on consent in the November board. So that is the plan ahead. And with that, I will hand it over to Sarita.
Thank you, Peter. So, Chair and committee members, I would just go over quickly the various changes that were outlined in your memo. I'll start with the governance guidelines and then I'll end with the bylaws. So in terms of the governance guidelines, you should have seen as outlined in that memo, there were several references throughout that document in terms of financial reports or other financial matters, that there are references to a five-year reports. And as Peter was mentioning, some of these changes are needed to reflect kind of current practices within the organization. And so our current long-term financial plan is actually a 10-year plan, as opposed to a 5-year plan. And so we're proposing to remove references to 5-year and actually leave it kind of open-ended, but in some instances have put in the statement that they be multi-year, because they will be multi-year, but we just don't want to restrict ourselves to that 5-year prior practice. We added some language in, or clarified some language with respect to projects that are coming in or going out for projects, things that may be required that we're seeking, things that in the past were actually required, but putting in a bit more flexibility in terms of what may or may not be required from proposers or proposals coming in. And as Peter mentioned, we've taken out all references to the strategic plan 2015-2020, as that's no longer relevant. And then towards the end of the governance guidelines, we just removed some examples that were included at the end of that seemed a bit out of date to staff at the moment. So those were, unless there are questions specific to the changes proposed to the governance guidelines, I'll go through what we did for the bylaws or are proposing. All right, so hearing none, I'll move on to the bylaws. Again, the bylaws as outlined in your memo, a lot of changes that are just related to alignment with current operational practices, updates to references to the strategic plan, removing outdated references to that. What I would like to kind of jump to is a key change that we're proposing in terms of the bylaws, which is related to the structure of the PPC or the composition of the PPC committee. And the proposed changes would allow for an ex officio member of the commission to potentially chair that committee. And staff is proposing this change to allow the chair of the board more flexibility in who could potentially chair that particular committee. So you'll notice that the language in that section related to the PPC allows the chair of the board to either appoint a member of the commission, a voting member, or an ex officio representative as the chair. And we also included language that should the board chair appoint an ex officio representative, that the board chair would also then appoint 5 voting members to the commission, as opposed to that committee, as opposed to 4 voting members. So just to ensure that we keep the same number of voting members on that committee. And then we also included language that in the absence of the committee chair, that the vice chair, the committee vice chair, would of course conduct meetings. And then in the absence of either one of those individuals, that alternates for those individuals could also chair a committee meetings. Now, the one thing I want to point out in terms of that recommendation for staff on the structure, the composition of the PPC, is that it does have an implication for the executive committee composition, which if you look at the bylaws on page 12 related to the executive committee, The composition right now is that you have the chair of the PPC committee. You currently have 2 voting members of the commission, and then you have the vice chair of the board. And so that would mean that if the chair of the board could potentially appoint an ex officio representative to the PPC, that would mean for the first time that an ex officio member of the board or representative could also be a member of the executive committee. And as I was talking through this change with Peter and Kim and Linda, we wanted to raise this to the executive committee, and I'll seek your input as to whether or not that change feels fine with you, because it would be a shift in that composition of that particular committee. So I will pause there, and Yvette, I see you may have a comment. We're seeking that feedback and seeing how the committee members feel about that.
Okay, does anybody?
It seems a little odd to me. It's Yvette. Hi. It seems a little odd to me that a former board member would be appointed to chair PPC and potentially, be on the executive committee. I'm wondering, this is coming from staff. Is there a board member that you want to bring back to PPC, or what is this about?
Yeah, thanks for raising, Yvette. No, just to be clear, when Sarita talks about ex officio members, these are our existing board members who are board members by virtue of their appointment by other entities, such as Deanne Tilton representing ICANN and Carla Plaitis-Howell representing the I'm not childcare policy table. Thank you. Jacqueline McCroskey representing the Children's Commission. So these are existing members who are, the ex officio is referencing their members because of their appointment by other bodies, and they are non-voting.
Okay.
So does that clarify it for you?
So current ex officios, not
exactly, and
yeah. So current ex officios, not okay.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
no.
I was like, what is going on here? Okay, and can you explain, like, what is why that just is there someone that you want to keep around, or where's this?
No, I think it was more, as Sarita said, it's in the spirit of giving the board some the board chair in particular, but the board broadly, more flexibility to tap into the considerable experience and expertise of our board members broadly, not just voting members, but non-voting members. And just recognizing that asking, and Yvette, you can appreciate this, and Astrid, and Judy obviously as well, chairing a committee is an investment of time. And the way our bylaws have been structured is only voting members have been able to be named as chairs. And this is intended to give the board a little bit more flexibility and provide a little bit of relief from additional demands on the voting members. Judy, I see Astrid's hand is up.
Astrid, do you have something that you'd like to say?
Yeah, I think it's great that we broaden the pool that we can draw down from. I'm a big supporter of broadening that group of people that can come in and chair committees, because I think that many of them have been here longer than certainly longer than I have, and they bring a lot of expertise, knowledge, and insight. So I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing.
And I would also just note that the change in terms of chairing a committee by an ex officio non-voting member is only being suggested for the PPC as a potential chair. But that does, if if an ex officio non-voting representative is appointed as chair to the PPC, that would then mean that that person would also be a member of the executive committee. Would not be the chair of the executive committee, because that remains to be the vice chair, the board vice chair's role, but just would be a part of the executive committee.
You know, our board has talked over the years, and Yvette and Judy in particular, and Astrid, I think you've been on the board long enough that, you know, some of these issues around ex officio members have come up a time or two. And as a matter of policy and practice, I've always been very impressed about how the board in practice treats ex officio members really no differently than voting members. And as Astrid noted, we've got a lot of talent on our board, both in terms of voting and non-voting members. And this is intended to tap into that experience and expertise, particularly with a focus on the committee that has the most programmatic breadth. You know, as Sarita has noted, it does mean that ex officio member, if a future board chair were to say, yeah, we want to appoint an ex officio member to the PPC, it does mean they become a member of the executive committee. They're still not a voting member, but, you know, if we think if the board chair and the board thought someone was, you know, ready, willing, and able to add value as the PPC chair, I would expect you would look to them to also add value in terms of their thoughts and contributions to the executive committee. I'm sorry, Peter, do you want to add to that?
No, please go ahead. Let's circle back to the commissioner first.
Are there questions that are coming up for you? Does that provide a little bit,
No,
is that context helpful?
Yeah, yes, that's extremely helpful, and I agree with all of that.
Terrific, thank you. And
Okay,
Astrid,
does
thank
anybody
you.
have any concerns they want to share? Okay,
Frank, are you good? Frank? Okay. All right, so Peter, do you want to, or Sarita, any further comments or closing comments? This will be coming back to the board for action. We have a very brief, it'd be a brief presentation at the October meeting, I recall, Peter, but anything you or Sarita want to do to close this item out?
No, I think we were just seeking that the committee's feedback on that one particular area, and given that it seems like there's support around the proposed change, then we'll treat this as a recommendation from the executive committee going forward to the board for the proposed changes as outlined in the documents that were shared with you.
okay. Do we need to do anything else in open session?
I wanted to confirm that there are no public comments on this item before we go into closed session.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, do you want to tell us how we're supposed to go into closed session?
So we're all going to log off of this Zoom, and Jamie provided another link for the closed session. And so we'll all go on, and as soon as all the executive committee members are on, I'll go ahead and assign host and co-host to Sarita and Craig.